Imagine for a second that you're planning this, like, massive high-stakes presentation for your job.
Oh man, the kind that makes or breaks your entire career.
Exactly. I mean, career-defining. And you set the date, you dictate the rules, you meticulously construct the entire environment so it plays perfectly to your unique strengths.
Right. You control every variable you possibly can.
Yeah. And then on the actual day of the presentation, standing in front of literally millions of people,
hmm
it just completely unravels.
It's basically the ultimate professional nightmare. You build the stage yourself only to trip over the microphone cord the second you walk out.
It really is. And today we are taking you on a deep dive into exactly that scenario, but on the largest possible stage. We're talking about the June 27, 2024 presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Right.
We're going to explore the strategy behind this fateful debate, the real-time physical performance that kind of shocked viewers, the intense media fallout, and how it all led to Biden's unprecedented withdrawal from the race.
And we have a really fascinating stack of sources to guide us through this. We'll be looking at, historical timelines, this incredibly deep academic study on media framing from the University of Michigan, medical analyses of the president's performance, and real-time op-eds.
From across the board, right?
Yeah, spanning the whole political spectrum. Outlets like Talking Points Memo on the left, the New York Times, right-wing media, all of it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the unraveling, we can't start under the studio lights on debate night. We have to rewind months earlier to figure out why this event was even happening in June in the first place.
Right, which takes us back to April 15th, 2024. Our sources outline this very specific internal campaign memo from Biden's team. And the disaster of June 27th is really only truly understood when you realize it was a calculated risk.
Right.
The Biden campaign actually decided to bypass the traditional Commission on Presidential Debates entirely and push for this June matchup.
Wait, pause for a second. Bypassing the Commission on Presidential Debates sounds like a bit of insider baseball. What actually is that commission? And why is walking away from it such a massive structural shift?
Well, so since 1987, the commission has been this bipartisan sponsor that sets the normal, predictable schedule for general election debates, usually holding them in September and October.
Close to the actual election.
Exactly. So by bypassing them, the Biden campaign essentially just tore up the established playbook. They threw out the normal schedule so they could write their own rules and dictate the timeline directly with the TV networks.
But why demand a debate in June? I mean, that is historically so early for a general election.
The logic detailed in the memo was, well, it was threefold. First, they wanted to get in front of the widest possible audience before the summer lull hits.
Like before people tune out.
Right, before the political conventions, before the Olympics, and just, people checking out for family vacations. Second, they wanted to physically show Biden standing next to Trump to project strength. They wanted to contrast his demeanor with what they framed as Trump's chaos.
And the third reason, because this is the one that really stands out now.
Yeah, this is the most telling part in hindsight. They wanted an early debate so that if Biden performed poorly, they would have a long runway to recover before November.
Oh, wow. Talk about a contingency plan becoming the main event. It's like an aging boxer demanding a title fight months before the normal season, setting the rules, picking the ring, and then tripping on the stairs on the way up to the mat.
That's a great way to put it.
Did they get everything they asked for in terms of the rules?
They did. They engineered a highly controlled environment. There was no live audience in the studio to cheer or jeer. And crucially, they instituted muted microphones.
Right, the muted mics.
Yeah, when it wasn't your turn to speak, your mic was electronically cut. This was a direct response to those chaotic 2020 debates where Trump was constantly interrupting.
I always wonder about the psychological impact of that specific rule, because by muting the microphones and silencing Trump's interruptions, did that inadvertently force the audience at home to focus entirely on Biden?
What's fascinating here is the absolute tension between debate prep and human psychology. Without auditory chaos to split the viewer's cognitive load, the human brain naturally hyperfixates on visual cues.
Right.
So the silence around Biden when he wasn't speaking was deafening. It made every blink, every hesitation, and every frozen expression incredibly salient to the over 51.3 million people watching on television.
And what those 51.3 million people saw was just immediate. I mean, the moment he started speaking, viewers heard this haltingly hoarse voice. He repeatedly mixed up the words billion and million.
And then came the moment that really came to define the night. Answering this pretty complex question on the national debt and healthcare, Biden just sort of trailed off. He lost his train of thought entirely.
Yeah.
And he ended his sentence by saying, "We finally beat Medicare."
Which is just handing his opponent an absolute gift on live television.
Oh, completely. Trump retorted immediately, saying he did beat Medicare. He beat it to death. NBC News later analyzed the full transcript and counted 106 personal attacks from Trump to Biden's 72. Trump even used the word Palestinian as a slur to attack Biden at one point.
But the focus, I mean, it just kept returning to Biden's delivery.
Right. After another mumbled, trailing sentence from Biden about Border Patrol, Trump just flatly stated to the moderators, "I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either."
If even his own family was terrified by what they saw on stage, I mean, our sources mentioned former First Lady Jill Biden later admitted she was frightened and thought he was literally having a stroke.
Yeah, on live television.
Right. What was actually happening to him physically in that moment?
Well, we have a medical analysis from the sources to help unpack that. A doctor on Talk TV reviewed the footage and pointed out Biden's shuffling gait as he walked on stage, along with that frozen expression when his mic was cut.
Which led to all that public speculation.
Exactly. Massive public speculation about structural neurodegenerative conditions, things like Parkinson's or long-term dementia. But the doctor noted the presentation on stage actually most closely resembled the mechanics of a delirium.
Wait, I always hear those terms used interchangeably. What is the actual mechanical difference between dementia and delirium?
It's an important distinction. Dementia is a chronic progressive decay of brain structure. The cardinal sign of early dementia is short-term memory loss, like literally forgetting the question you were just asked seconds ago.
Okay, and delirium.
Delirium, on the other hand, is an acute temporary confusional state. It's often triggered by a severe stress response, an underlying minor infection, or a medication issue that just temporarily disrupts neural processing.
So it's temporary.
Right. Biden seemed to remember the questions being asked, but was just utterly confused in his delivery of the complex answers.
Which really suggests his team might have known he was in a vulnerable state but pushed him out there anyway.
And the doctor in our sources drew a brilliant historical parallel here. He brought up Winston Churchill's physician during World War II, Lord Moran.
Oh, I'm not familiar with him.
So during a crucial meeting with the U.S. president, Churchill had a cardiac incident, and Lord Moran had to make an impossible choice.
Which was?
Does he pull his patient for emergency medical care and risk the U.S. pulling out of the war effort, or does he keep him in the room? He had to weigh the biological needs of a single man against the geopolitical needs of an entire country. The doctor suggested Biden's team faced a modern version of that exact dilemma.
Wow. A debate is a highly rehearsed, performative television event requiring quick, snappy sound bites. But governing a country requires deep synthesis, judgment, and relying on a team of experts.
Yeah. But the sterile environment of that debate stage isolated the performative aspects. There was just nowhere to hide. The rules they demanded became a magnifying glass on his physical limitations.
So the physical reality was laid bare. How did the broader ecosystem process it? Because, this didn't exist in a vacuum. It was instantly packaged and weaponized.
Absolutely. Our sources show an ecosystem far less interested in policy than it is in personality. The immediate pundit panic was unprecedented.
Yeah, that analysis from Talking Points memo coined a term for it, right?
They did. They called a specific subset of the media and political partisans the Do Something Caucus.
The Do Something Caucus. What does that actually look like in practice?
It's basically a group that demands immediate, drastic action. Not necessarily with a cohesive plan, but simply as an emotional release valve for their own panic. They just want to feel like they have control over an uncontrollable situation.
And that panic wasn't just coming from critics. It was coming from Biden's closest allies.
Exactly. Thomas L. Friedman, a renowned New York Times columnist and a personal friend of Biden's since 9/11, wrote that watching the debate made him weep. He publicly called for Biden to bow out.
And the New York Times editorial board itself published a piece urging him to step aside.
They did.
To look at this impartially, as our sources do, how did the right-wing media react to that meltdown?
Well, they were heavily focused on the panic itself. Outlets like Fox News and Alto openly ridiculed New York Times writers, who initially tried to frame the debate as a draw before turning on the president.
Ah, I see.
And Daily Wire tracked how quickly and overwhelmingly the legacy media turned. Regardless of political leaning, sources across the spectrum completely agreed on one thing. The optics were an unmitigated disaster.
I hear that, but couldn't you argue that the media was just doing its job by reporting on a legitimate crisis? I mean, if the President of the United States is freezing up on live television, isn't that naturally the biggest story in the world?
It is a massive story, absolutely. But the issue is proportionality and framing. And this brings us to a deep academic study from the University of Michigan that looked at how we consume political news.
Okay, what did they find?
They studied media framing during this election and found that 84% of all election headlines focused on candidate personality or strategy. They call this the horse race frame.
How do they actually measure that? What makes a headline a horse race versus something else?
So the researchers scrape thousands of articles and categorize the primary frame of the headline. They look at the verbs and the subjects. Is the headline about a policy action, legislation, or an economic platform?
Or is it just gossip?
Exactly. Or is it entirely focused on who is winning in the polls, who is losing, off-screen gossip, and campaign tactics? The data showed the news overwhelmingly prioritizes reporting on the public's opinion of the candidates rather than what the candidates actually plan to do in office.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like a stock market where the share price is completely detached from the company's actual revenue. The media is trading entirely on sentiment, which forces politicians to act like meme stocks rather than value generators.
This raises an important question about how this algorithmic framing directly impacts voter psychology and candidate strategy. If the media only rewards you with coverage when you engage in personality attacks or horse race drama, candidates are incentivized to abandon policy discussions entirely.
Right, why talk about tax reform if it won't even get a headline?
Exactly. The media creates a feedback loop. Voters aren't given policy information, so they vote based on personality, which in turn validates the media's decision to only cover personality. The electorate is effectively flying blind on the issues that will dictate their daily lives.
Let's talk about the intense polarization within that 84%. Did the study find that this personality framing is applied equally?
The polarization is stark. They tracked how different outlets covered the candidates. The Daily Caller, a right-leaning site, was 100% negatively biased in its coverage of Kamala Harris and 100% positive in its coverage of Trump.
1%, wow.
Yeah. And on the flip side, left-leaning Mother Jones and the New York Times were intensely negative toward Trump, though the Times also published negative bias against Harris as well.
Can you give an example of how that negative framing actually looks in a headline, like practically?
Sure. The study highlighted a Fox News headline that used the word raunchy to describe Vice President Harris's interview on the Call Her Daddy podcast.
Okay, so a very loaded word.
Right. The framing there isn't about the substance of what she said on the podcast. The headline uses a descriptive word to frame her as dodging serious news outlets, making it a story about her campaign strategy and character rather than her actual platform.
So if you are listening to this on your commute right now and wondering why the party turned on their own incumbent president so fast, you really have to look at this pressure cooker.
Yeah, you do.
The media's intense personality-driven framing meant no amount of standard political spin was going to cool the situation down.
Though the campaign certainly tried. I mean, the initial reaction was deep denial and just a flurry of excuses. About an hour into the debate, the spin room started claiming Biden just had a cold.
A cold book.
And later, Biden himself blamed fatigue from traveling. He said he had crossed 30 time zones in 11 days on trips to Europe.
Wait, I remember reading the timeline in our sources. Wasn't he resting at Camp David for nearly a week right before the debate?
He was, yeah. The travel statistic was factually true, but critics were quick to point out that he had returned from Europe well before the debate and had dedicated several days strictly to debate prep and rest.
Right.
His son, Hunter Biden, even suggested that the sleep medication Ambien played a role in the poor performance, which, interestingly, ties back to that medical theory of a medication-induced delirium we talked about earlier.
Despite all the excuses, he was initially very defiant about staying in, wasn't he?
Very defiant. A week after the debate, he sat down for an interview with ABC News and flatly stated that only the Lord Almighty coming down could convince him to quit the race.
But the human willpower of one man, even a sitting president, eventually meets the institutional weight of a political party. The internal party struggle must have been wild behind closed doors.
Oh, absolutely. We know heavyweights like Barack Obama and Bill Clinton publicly defended him at first. They put out statements saying, bad debate nights happen.
But eventually the dam broke.
Yeah.
Over 30 congressional Democrats called publicly for his withdrawal.
Not everyone was on board with the panic, however. Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania had his own experience with a rough health-related debate performance during his 2022 Senate run.
Oh, right.
He was incredibly blunt. He told panicking Democrats to chill the F out and explicitly refused to join what he called the Democratic vultures on Biden's shoulder.
But the realists, or the vultures, depending on your perspective, won out. On July 21st, bowing to insurmountable pressure, Joe Biden officially withdrew from the race and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris.
Who, as our sources note for the historical record, would eventually go on to lose the general election to Donald Trump.
So what does this all mean? The Talking Points memo analysis made a fascinating point about the mechanics of modern politics. They argue that modern political campaigns are run exactly like corporate marketing campaigns for Apple or McDonald's. Does Biden's withdrawal prove that a modern presidential candidate is essentially treated like a tech product?
It's an incredibly apt metaphor. Think about how a corporate board operates. If the product launch, in this case, the debate, completely fails, the board of directors will step in. In politics, that board is made up of mega donors, party strategists, and media elites.
And their mechanism for forcing a candidate out isn't just asking nicely, right?
Exactly. The mechanism is capital. Donors freeze their contributions. Without capital, the campaign corporation cannot run ads, they can't pay staff or organize ground operations.
The money dries up.
Right. The candidate basically becomes a failing asset that needs to be liquidated to save the broader corporate entity of the political party.
Even if that overrides what the primary voters originally chose months prior.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a massive structural shift in how democratic institutions function. The primary system is supposed to be the ultimate democratic mechanism where the grassroots voters choose the nominee. But this event proved that when extreme crisis hits, the party apparatus still holds the emergency brake. It highlights a profound tension between grassroots democracy and institutional survival in the mass media age.
It's an incredible chain of events to review, a calculated strategic gamble to bypass the debate commission and demand an early matchup backfired in the most spectacular way possible.
It really did.
It exposed a physical reality that couldn't be spun, which was then magnified by an algorithmic media ecosystem that thrives on personality crises rather than policy debates. And it ultimately led to the sudden end of a 50-year political career.
The convergence of physical vulnerability and media mechanics created an inescapable trap.
So for everyone listening, here's what we want you to think about. The next time you are scrolling through election headlines on your phone, take a pause. Look closely at the verbs and the framing being used.
Yeah, really look at it.
Ask yourself, is this article actually teaching me about a policy that will affect my life, my taxes, my community? Or is it just selling me a storyline about a politician's personality and campaign strategy?
Because if 84% of our media diet is focused entirely on optics and who is winning the horse race, it begs a rather terrifying question about how we make decisions as an electorate.
Will future elections inevitably be won by actors, influencers, and entertainers rather than public servants? Are we moving toward a world where the actual grueling, complex job of governing a country is completely disconnected from the performative skills required to get elected? It's something to chew on.
Definitely.
You can set the stage, you can build the environment to play perfectly to your strengths. But if all the audience cares about is whether you trip on the cord, does the presentation even matter?